I got friends only wanna talk business. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I've been reading all the war, and I've been shutting down the stars.
And welcome to Put That Coffee Down, the Freight Sales Show for closers. My name is Kevin Hill. As always, with you here on Tuesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time on FreightWaves TV. Thanks for joining us here. We're going to talk about sales and specifically transparency. So transparency sales, transparency marketing as it relates to the freight industry. And it comes from, we have a great guest today, Andrew Lockwood. He's from Suddath Global Logistics, Senior Director of Managed Logistics over there. We were talking earlier this week about the topic, and we were limiting on how often, websites in the industry kind of spout the same kind of key metrics and same kind of marketing copy. And it's all tailored around we're perfect or we're as perfect as possible and we can do all things to all people. But is that really an efficient way to sell? Is that the best way to sell? Is it better to pick your spots? Is it better to be vulnerable, right? To be vulnerable, to show your potential buyers, whether those are current customers or prospects, a side of you, a side of your brand. This is what we're really good at. This is not what we're really good at. And leading with your strengths and not trying to push your weaknesses all over the market. I think a lot of times we spend too much time, too much resources, and way too much money trying to sell to potential buyers that really don't fit our mold. And trying to get out of that, spending your time wisely because that's the most precious resource, and getting down to business, finding potential buyers that really match and align well with what you're offering. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to bring Andrew on right now to do that. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. I hope we have enough time to get all this in because there's so much ground to cover. There's a lot of good stuff here.
There is. There's a lot of good stuff. We were talking yesterday about this and really about kind of, you have pre-pandemic, then you have pandemic, the mess that was, and then coming back into more normal times right now. And, buyers are looking for something different. And part of that is transparency, but some of those old questions, old metrics, old selling points that we all used to go out there and sell off of have changed, right? That they need new solutions. And part of that is not necessarily this brave face as salespeople that we often do, saying, "Oh, we can do this, we can do that. Oh, you need this. We're great at this," and then trying to hurry back to the office to figure out what they were saying. Googling it on the way home, but we're overcommitting all over the place.
That's right, and yeah, we live in a very different environment now. 3 years past the pandemic, I feel like my career has been bookended by like some sense of normality pre-COVID, and then there was the COVID years, and then now here we are 3 years after that event, and so we look back and we're like, man, that was a black swan event. Like, what happened? You're exactly right, Kevin. Like, it is time to throw out the playbook because I think just the sales dynamic has changed. Customers are looking for different things than they were 3 years ago. And you and I know just from our own personal conversations, like I'm not for the glossy, everything is great type websites. Like, no, like here's the fact: you drive down the highway, trucks have some dirt on them, right? Like everything is not pristine in the way that sometimes the industry conveys that message over websites or PowerPoints. And so I've tried to personally just take a very different approach. And honestly, like I want to see that same approach in my vendors. And that's kind of what I expect of my team. So you're spot on. Like it is a very different environment now. And I say throughout the playbook, it's a new time.
It is. You mentioned it, that bookend, before the pandemic, after the pandemic. Before the pandemic, everything seemed, for years, for a couple decades, right? There's this trend toward efficiency. Everything was nice and consistent. You had the financial crisis, but that's something that logistics wasn't a central figure in. It just hit the reverberations of that. But you have this consistent pattern where tomorrow is going to be much the same as today and yesterday and the day before that. And everyone, I think, tailored their sales and marketing toward that. That's not the world now. You're right. Potential buyers out there, shippers want plan B, plan C. You have plan A, but we need to put in effect plan B, plan C, to be able to manage any other black swan events that come up, because we know that we have black swans in the economy, in trucking, all the time. Maybe not as major as the pandemic, but you have these isolations. We met about the little after, I think, or maybe a little bit before the dual hurricanes back in 2017. We started putting some research together on ELDs.
Yeah, I mean, the message of just chaos is no longer prevalent. Right now, we're shifting away from chaos, but to your point, there's always obstacles that come up. So, for example, the LA port shutdown. It was 2 weeks ago, and so we had to figure out plan B. And so I think you're right. Customers now, they want options. That is what is selling.
Whereas, risk management really is what we're talking about.
It is, and so I think as a part of that, here's where it dovetails the transparency and vulnerability. You can be a company that sells a whole bunch of things and goes to market with 62 different things you can offer, but of those 62 things, are all 62 really A+ offerings? Maybe 8 are. And so, I think you have customers who are already, and this has always been the case in buying and selling, right? People have their spidey senses up. They want to know, is this really the truth? Is it what I'm seeing on the slides, what I'm hearing, is that actually going to be fulfilled? And so, I try to take a more, vulnerable and transparent approach. I think you can operate from a sense of knowing what's going on and being, very transparent of we'll hit it out of the park in this area, but maybe not as strong in this area. And by doing that, what it does is it kind of shifts the table around. It puts you in the customer's shoes and lets them, it signals to them that, hey, actually this guy's taking a view from my side of the table. Maybe that's honesty and some trust, which is what we know is foundational in building any kind of relationship, business or personal life. So, I like that very very transparent, honest way of selling, because I think it's legitimate. When you have a strong offering, buddy, you can back it up, and when you don't, you're being honest with that, and maybe connecting them with somebody that can. So, it's a point in time in our industry where people just want options. So when LA shut down, maybe I can reroute it through the Port of Houston, for example, or, mitigating risk from a warehousing standpoint. Maybe you don't go with just one distribution center. Maybe you have several others. And here's the cool thing, Kevin. People are willing to pay for this, right? It's not always about low cost. We talk about cost all the time, but there's the three things that people, you have to pick two of the three. There's cost and speed and quality, and you can only pick two. You can't have all three. But there are more customers out there than I think we realize that want, quality. They want speed, and they're willing to pay a little bit more if we just kind of sit back and take it in and listen.
I think the risk management portion, or that plan B, plan C, is a good way to add premium services, right? Showing, there's a little bit of vulnerability in there, but risk management, people will pay a premium for risk management, right? To have backup plans in place.
That's right, and it's all about expectations. Even with our team, our marketing team, I say, what is that customer experience? If you start with that in mind, and then design backwards, you can touch all these elements and make sure you've got different strategies for risk mitigation. But you've got to start with the end in mind. Is what do you want the customer experience to be? So, for example, I'm getting a furniture delivery today, and so they give me a 2-hour window. Well, cool. 2-hour window. Would in an ideal world would I like a 15-minute window? Yeah. But I can deal with a 2-hour window. Why? Because the expectation's been set, right? So I can plan my life around that 2-hour window. But same said, the further you back up in the supply chain, where it's not as distinct as a 2-hour window, we know there's over ordering, under ordering, all kinds of things can happen. And so just giving, kind of going back to the top level and just giving people options, that's what they want now. They want to know that, worst case scenario, if the worst case scenario happens, what then? And so if you can address that, the rest is gravy.
Sometimes options, having 1 or 2 or 3 main core services and having many options on those is a much better strategy than having 62 different services. Because we know from CPG brands, from consumer brands, to stocks, to all of this. If you have a portfolio of offerings, there's usually, the Pareto rule takes effect, right? So 20% of those are going to generate 80% of the income. The other 80% hopefully will generate 20% of the revenue, and probably maybe minus 20% of the profits, because there's a large portfolio of services or goods. There's always so many money losers in there that it really doesn't make sense most of the time.
That's right. Well, and I'll say this just from personal experience. I've worked at a spectrum of companies here in the industry. One company was very focused only on dedicated trucking, right? And that's always, we sold that every day, all day, just that. Worked with other companies where it is this kind of broad spectrum of services. And so I think it all goes back to the value prop and just knowing your customer, like what's going to resonate with your customer. And you know this very quickly for those of you in sales. Instead of trying to approach them with 62 different things, what do you actually hear are their issues? Because there may be, Kevin, to your point, there may be one or two or three things that you're trying to solve for, but like maybe limit the scope to just that. Like don't tack on all of your other services just then. No, solve the problems or solve the issues that they're bringing to the table. There's a reason you're talking in the first place. But I think an important skill too in that setting when you can sell so much is knowing when to cut and run. Like when is it not a connection? And this is something we've kind of talked about sometimes, Kevin, too. Like all sales are not all good sales. Like, so what I mean by that is sometimes there's customers that are misaligned with you, right? Like you may be an organization, a company built around speed and quality. Well, guess what? That's not going to align very well with a customer that's super focused on cost. And so if you start going down that road, again, there's not organizational alignment. So being able to measure that and understand that early on, I think is a really critical skill in this environment. Because otherwise, you're just setting yourself up for some heartache down the road. Yeah,
it's more critical than anyone really realizes. Because, as I said earlier, right, and this is just an old saying, right? Time is your most valuable resource, so use it wisely. And if you have, we were talking, you guys do information, right? Information and metrics, right? If you're talking to people, or if your marketing team's going out and collecting leads from people that's not really their top priority. If your salespeople are out there talking to people that or customer shippers that's not their top priority, or maybe they're their top three priorities coming in, then the probability of making the sale, making a good deal, right? Making a deal, then making a good deal is two different things. Making a good deal is so low, it's just not worth the time or effort, because you should be focused in on people where your core alignments, right, your core services, your specialties really align very well with who you're picking up the phone and trying to get a meeting with.
Well, exactly. And I want to go back to something you mentioned a few minutes ago of like the websites we see and the messaging in the industry, because oftentimes that doesn't align with the value prop that we're actually trying to sell. Like if we think we're really good at warehousing or transportation or international freight forwarding, does that translate to the messaging and the value prop that we actually put out there online, or the message that we're going to conferences with? So I think you're spot on, man. Like we convey this pretty picture that doesn't always translate to what reality is. And so I'm a big believer of like, I want to see behind the scenes. Kevin, I am a big fan of Deion Sanders in the college football world. Yes, he had a great career. And in fact, I've got his baseball cards laying around, right? I love Deion. You know why I love Deion? It's because he's transparent, man. I can get the behind the scenes tour of what's going on at Jackson State and now at Colorado. Would we even be talking about Colorado football a year ago? No, they were irrelevant, 1-11, right? In Colorado, again, I've never been there. Great. I have to assume it's a great institution, city of Boulder. But look what the guy's done with a YouTube channel and some visibility and vulnerability, right? And so taking a page out of the college football world, Deion's doing something very radically different than like a Nick Saban and Kirby Smart. Now, has he won a national championship yet? Not yet. I give him a few years, right? But it's a very different approach that I think like we in the logistics industry can take a page out of. Like, what are we doing to make sure that, there's this dichotomy, right? There's an old school phrase of like, people need to know how the sausage is made. And I think that's partly true, right? Like there's some stuff you've got to keep in house and just deal with because there's process improvement. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, right? Like, again, is what reality from an execution standpoint, is that matching what you sold in that initial presentation, right? And let me go here with this, Kevin. Our industry the physical execution of goods moving into a warehouse, being stored, or moving from point to point, that's half the battle. The other battle is visibility. People want to have a comfort to know that, hey, this shipment's going to arrive on time and full, or at any point I can pull up my mobile device and track a shipment and know it's exactly on I-75 going through Chattanooga right now. Like that information, that's half of what we're delivering in this industry. And I think that point gets missed a lot, is it's not just about physical execution. It's about the comfort. It's about the information, the visibility, the transparency that we're providing in customers.
Yeah, and the transparency, the credibility as well, right? So to build credibility, you have to build transparency, and that's one of the things Dion has really done with that is giving that inside look, developing a story behind the story, if you will, and no one wants to know how the sausage is made. You don't have to know it, but getting a little insight, getting what you need to know, especially in this industry where you need to know where your goods are, or you need to know who's handling them as well,
right.
And showing a vulnerability or showing some inside baseball or inside football into what you're doing, and keeping that afloat. I think that is a really good strategy.
Yeah,
is to share kind of your personal. And I go back to a survey I was reading last night about 94% of consumers go for brands that show vulnerability, right? And about 56% of those show a much higher stickiness rate with those brands that engage personally, engage in ways that aren't that glossy, buttoned up, traditional website ways. Because I think most 3PLs try to seem, especially in their marketing and their website, try to seem bigger than what they are, because they think that is a more sellable quality or trait than being really good at a couple of different things and being small, which is not really the case. But it seems like a risky move, but it really isn't.
It's not. And listen, I'm a big subscriber of Gary Vaynerchuk, right? I don't agree with everything he puts out there, but Gary is very big on, like, look, we're human, right? Like, this is a human experience. Quit trying to be something you're not. Whether that's you're in a role that's not a great fit, or you're trying to obtain something that's really, like, it's just it's not the right goal for you. Like, understand, like, we as humans want to be dealt with as humans. And so again, kind of, I'm not bashing. I feel like there may be a lot of marketers out there, Kevin, who are like, man, Andrew and Kevin really bashing my website. Maybe, but I'm just saying we've got to change with the times, right? And what resonates with me as an end consumer is that human connection. I realize I'm not representative of all U.S. citizens here, right? But, like, I want to know that maybe some stuff's not exactly always the best within your company, right? Oftentimes we see that, like, something blows up, and then naturally you're like, okay, what's the next step? Like, for example, Budweiser right now, right? They're kind of going through a big deal, big controversy. There's a lot of different perspectives on that. And so what I'm most interested in, though, is, like, what are the next steps to deal with that situation, right? I wouldn't recommend, diving in the political spectrum, right? It's kind of put them in a tough position. But look, the fact is, you and I, every company we work with, we're going to be in a tough position at some point where we have to determine what is that path forward. And I think one that is kind of centered around just a message of humility and, like, vulnerability, and we got to adapt and kind of change this environment. Like, those are the companies that I think make it. Those are the individuals that kind of make it to the next step and recover. And then those companies that are really not going to change, very stuck in their way, like, not adaptable, I worry about the future prospects, right? And I think that's where we go back to COVID. Like, COVID happened, there was chaos. Now we're not in an environment of chaos. We're in an environment that is a different sales environment. Have we adapted to that? Has your sales, if you're a CEO, has your sales force adapted to that? Or are you still selling chaos? Because guess what? Chaos ain't selling in the marketplace anymore. People have moved on. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways we could go with that, Kevin. But back to Gary Vee, like, love that he makes it about the human experience. And I think we've got to do that too. Like, are we selling a pitch that if we turn the tables around, like, would that actually resonate with us? Or is it just a whole bunch of stock, words and sentences that we've put together to try to push forward our services in a really inefficient manner?
And it's interesting because I talked to a few shippers, and one of the biggest complaints is that you could take one pitch deck for every freight broker, change out the names, and it'll be 99% the same after that, right? It just switch out the names. That's all you have to do because everyone's using the same buzzwords, the same language, the same offerings. So there's very little differentiation between all these different parties.
That's true. Like I've been there before, right? Like Kevin, I've been the guy changing out customer A,
I have too.
customer B on the pitch decks, right? Like we've all gone through that. I just think it's like me now in 2023. I realize like that's a really inefficient way to sell. Like I had a great mentor early on, and he would always remind me, like Andrew, like one of the best traits of a person in sales is the ability to listen. Just so hard for people like you and I that like to talk, right? But like letting the customer speak and say, hey, like, what are you actually dealing with? Like, if you had a Pareto chart, what is the top 2 or 3 things you're trying to solve for, right? And maybe at this point, at this juncture, like, I can't solve any of those, but let me connect you with somebody that I do know that can solve. Because if sales is based on trust, right, one small area of trust is connecting somebody with somebody that can help and assist, right? Like, don't waste my time with a pitch if it's not irrelevant to my company. And so, again, like, take a human approach, right? Forget about, I've actually found this really, really powerful, Kevin. Like if we take a step back and forget about ourselves and our sales goals and our company goals here for a second and just try to do the right thing, connect people with who they should be connected with to move them forward. I really do believe like that's going to lead to a lot of success down the road. That's a long-term game. We have to realize that. Like that may not equate to your 6-month sales goal right now. But if you're in it for the long run and to build that trust and relationships with customers, do the small things all along that connect them, right? Because then that conveys supreme confidence in that you're playing the long game. And whether they come around in 6 months or 2 years or 10 years, like some of my best business deals, Kevin, took 2 years. 2 years. Didn't think it was going to happen, and it finally did. So I just want to remind us, like in the sales cycle, play the long game, man. Like sometimes we get obsessed with this month's numbers. No, it's about the long game.
It is. It really is about the long game, and that strategy's helped me out tremendously. Once I really started adopting it, I probably got to an age where I'd made all the mistakes and started adopting that and just connecting with the best option. Oftentimes it wasn't me, but I'd get the piece of business that eventually I'd get the piece of business that I really wanted, that I really needed, and that I could execute the best on. We were talking about an entrepreneur. Neither of us can remember exactly who it is, but it doesn't really matter. Who would go into meetings with a pitch deck, do his presentation, and then poke holes in his own presentation immediately after. I think it's a great strategy, really.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's really.
I think that really builds credibility.
It does, but you've got to establish the credibility first, right? Like that you know your stuff. And so where I'd go to, like one thing that I do is I try to put the puzzle pieces in the industry together. There's so much information that's free. Like just pull up front page of FreightWaves, scroll to the bottom, and you've got in real time the average line haul metrics for everything, for the trucking industry. You know what ocean container rates are. You know what tender rejects are. Like this is all free. Thank you, FreightWaves. There's a lot. By the way, there's a lot more behind that in Sonar. Same thing for DAT. Same thing for Truck Stop. Like I could go on and list all the different resources in the industry that are free. Like they're posting this out here. It's knowledge. If we can put those puzzle pieces together, and that equates to making someone's decision easier, or their life easier, or their knowledge of the supply chain, so they can plan the next 3 steps they need to plan. Like that's value, and you did all that from a free basis. And so. Yeah, I mean, I really do. I think you've got to know your audience too. But if you've established subject matter expertise, like these things, then like why not shoot 2 or 3 holes in your pitch deck from the vantage point of the customer? Because then what that does is that turns the table around and shows the customer, look, I'm willing to look at my own business through the lens of your shoes. I know that sounds weird, lens through your shoes. That may not, but you know what I'm saying. I'm going to put myself in your shoes, look through this deck in that context and understand like where the value may be or where it may not be, rather than wait for you to try to shoot holes. And so to me, Kevin, this speeds up that decision-making process. Like it's either a go or no go. after you do that. There's not this kind of in between decision period where you've got to, because again, everyone's got their spidey senses up. Like, what are they trying to, bait and switch me on? And so that takes care, that eliminates this from the process. Very efficient.
It really does. Great conversations always, Andrew. It's always a pleasure talking to you and working with you too, man. Thanks. To reach out and learn more about you, just go to LinkedIn, right? Andrew Lockwood.
That's how our relationship started, Kevin. I think I reached out one time about some survey results, but so there's probably 10 of you. I would love to meet. I just don't know it yet. But yeah, reach out on LinkedIn, Andrew Lockwood.
Yeah, please.
In the logistics industry. Appreciate the time, Kevin.
You bet. Thanks, Andrew, as always. And there was Andrew Lockwood. He's a senior director of managed logistics over at Suddath Global Logistics, talking about transparency in sales. That's going to wrap it for this Put That Coffee Down, but we have some podcasts coming out, and we'll be here next Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time.
I got friends only want to talk business. I got expensive because winning's expensive. I got expensive because winning's expensive. I've been reading all the war, and I've been shutting down the stars.